Now, we remind you that the foundational scripture for our study in this series is Hebrews 11:6. Now, without faith, it is impossible to please God. For he who comes to God must believe that he is God and that he is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And that word rewarder means to reimbursement for out-of-pocket expenses. That's what it was in that culture, and that's what we understand even in this culture. When you've got receipts showing where you had to pay out of pocket and you get paid back for it, that's what he's saying. You get paid back for that which you're doing. That which you do for me, I take note of it, I write it down in the books, and when you stand before me, you will receive a reward. For you to think otherwise, he reminded us in Galatians 6:7. For you to think otherwise is considered a mockery. He says, for God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, thus he shall also reap. Now that's a principle that applies to anything. You know, you sow meanness, you go get meanness back. You know, you sow goodness, you go get goodness back. You sow favor, you go get favor back. You know, but he's talking about whatever you sow and do for me, all the seeds that you plant. Rest assured, the Father who sees in secret will repay you. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, we'll read it again, verses 11 through 16, those 5 verses. For no man can lay a foundation other than the one which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Translation, every single building that I'm aware of has a cement foundation. Unless you got a tent, you know. But any structure that's going to pass a building inspection, you got to have a solid, firm, concrete cement foundation. So every building has it. Now, how that building is built from there up, whether it's wood, whether it's metal, you know, whatever, that's a different story. And it's likewise with us. Every person who has genuinely been born again, received Jesus as their personal Lord and Savior, and truly experienced genuine spiritual birth, regardless of our denomination, regardless of how long we've been in the faith, we still have the same foundation. From the moment we're saved, we begin to build upon that foundation. Our reward is based upon how we build upon that foundation. Where we spend eternity is dependent upon what we believe. How we spend eternity is dependent upon how we build upon the foundation. Reading on. Now, if any man builds on the foundation with gold, silver, and precious stones, he gives 3 good quality items and then 3 flammable items. Gold was refined gold, like you would find in king's palaces. Silver is what they use for coins, idols, and other vessels, utensils, and pots and all that kind of stuff made out of silver. It's corruptible in the sense that it will rust, but nonetheless it is durable. And then precious stones, we noted, is not rubies and diamonds, it is marble and granite. The common denominator in gold, silver, marble, and granite is if it's caught on fire, although it may have soot all over it, you can wipe the soot off, hose it down, and you still have your structure intact. Then it goes into wood, hay, and stubble, or wood, hay, and straw. Wood is flammable, whether it's a 2x4 or 2x6 or plywood. Hay was that which was fed to animals, but it was also used for the roofs of slave huts who couldn't afford who couldn't afford gold, silver, precious stones. And then you had straw or stubble, and that was that which even the animals wouldn't eat. So what did they do with it? Just like pine straw. What did you do with it? There's a difference between hay and pine straw. Well, they would stuff their beddings with it, and they would insulate the walls of their homes with it. Common denominator, all 3 of materials are flammable. So he goes on to say, each man's work will become evident, for the day we stand before him, the judgment seat of Christ, will show it, because it is to be revealed with fire. And the fire itself will test the quality of each man's work. When we stand before him, he's going to take all our works, all our deeds, and set it on fire, so to speak. That which is burned up, what happens? He says, if any man's work which he has built on his foundation remains, he will receive a reward. Gold, silver, precious stones. He said, but if any man's work is burned up, he will suffer loss. That word zemi in the Greek means he will forfeit his reward. You're forfeited, just like forfeiting a ball game. You get no victory out of it. You forfeited. You don't even get to play. You forfeit. You forfeit the reward. But he himself will be saved, yet as through fire. And we use the analogy of a 70-year-old man who lives alone. He's a widower, perhaps, and he's accumulated a lot through the years. In his younger days, he had trophies and awards as a great athlete. Since then, he's won Business Person of the Year. He's had Chamber of Commerce awards. He's got all kinds of accolades. He's got all that displayed in his house. He's got beautiful furniture. He's got so many things that he crafted himself, things that he built himself, things that he remodeled himself. But one day that whole house catches on fire. He himself gets out, but he's the only thing that survives. Everything else is burnt to the ground. He's rejoicing that he has his life. Yet everything else that he had worked for has nothing to show for it. He says many people will stand before the Lord in that same manner. They will stand naked before the Lord, and they will stand before him rejoicing that, hey, I made it to heaven. My name is in the Lamb's Book of Life. He closes that book, opens up the books. Now we have nothing to show for it as basis for reward. He said that's the reality many people will face this day and time. Heaven is part of the foundation, but here we're talking about basis for reward. So let me ask you, and just be honest, feel free to answer yes or no. Do you ever think about heaven? Do you ever think about heaven and what heaven would be like? I got to find it, but I know Billy Graham wrote a book about heaven. And I need to find it. I think I got it somewhere. And I'm sure he's got revelation on what the Lord showed him in regards to heaven. But if you ever thought about heaven, but see, many people who even are believers, they don't think about heaven that much. They don't really have an appetite for eternity because they have very little invested there. Say, for instance, you've worked hard and you've made good money in your life. And for the last 10 years, you have a mountain home or a beach house, either one, whichever appeals to you. It would be a toss-up if I had to give the option to my wife. She'd choose the beach house, I know, but that mountain home would be a good close second. But say, for instance, you've been working on it, and it's been a project. Along and along, as you get a little extra money, you've been, trying to work on it, bring it along. You're going to think a lot about that beach house because you're looking forward to the day that you can actually enjoy it. So you're doing your normal everyday work. You're doing your normal everyday business. But in the back of your mind, you've got thoughts about one of these days I'm going to retire, that beach house is going to be completed, and I'm going to be able to go enjoy living at the beach. Well, you are beach house minded. He's saying maybe we need to consider heaven and heaven's rewards more than we do. But many people don't because they have very little invested there. They don't have that home. They don't have many rewards. So what's there for them to look forward to? The more you have invested, a little more you can look forward to it. On the other hand, religion can be so heavenly minded. Sing about it. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. And they become so heavenly minded, and they put more emphasis on the return of Christ than they do the power of the gospel. Now stop and think about that statement. Many people place more emphasis on the return of Christ. He's going to return and he's going to fix all this mess that we're in. Instead of believing in the power of the gospel to rebuke those things like we've been teaching about on Sunday. That's the power of the gospel. Your authority. Exercising your authority. Well, as you do that, we're storing up treasures in heaven. But some people are so heavenly minded, they're of no earthly good. Yet in the kingdom, you're so heavenly kingdom minded that you're of great earthly good because you realize that which I'm doing for the kingdom here on earth is going to be rewarded in the kingdom of heaven. You see the difference? Let me ask you another question. We know that Jesus took back on the cross when he said, "It is finished," to Telestai. And he says, "I took back the keys of death, hell, and the grave." That Satan had stole from Adam. All that authority he stole from Adam. That he flaunted in front of him in that third test in the wilderness. "See all these kingdoms? I'll give them to you if you'll bow down and worship me." And Jesus says, "Go, Satan. It is written, you shall worship the Lord and him only." Well, all those kingdoms, everything, the cosmos, every system, field, and industry, Jesus took back the authority over that on the cross. Well, that being the case, you ever wonder why the devil's still allowed to roam around these last 2,000 years and continuing? Why he's still allowed to tempt? Why he's still allowed to roam about like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour? You ever wonder why he's allowed to do that? I mean, if getting saved was only about going to heaven, then the moment we got saved, the moment we genuinely were born again, poof, we'd go to heaven. Why is Satan allowed to come and present challenges for us? Because it gives us a choice. Choose you this day whom you go serve. You cannot serve God and mammon, Jesus said in Luke 16. And without choices, there's no basis for reward for making the right choice. See, if we never had any choices, and the moment we get saved, everything was just peachy keen, how would we ever make any choices? And those choices serve as basis for our reward. We have a chance to go high and be exalted in pride. We instead choose to humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord. The Father who sees in secret will repay you. We have the chance to keep it all for ourselves. We decide to give. So a loving Father is saying, here, I give you the authority over the devil. He should never win. You have the authority as a believer to win every time. So as you do those victories, why not stockpile victories? And as you stockpile those victories, it's basis for reward in heaven. You know, we were talking before y'all came in here. We was talking about temptation in the form of lust. Well, if you are presented with that opportunity to admire or let it gravitate into lust, and you admire and stop right there. The devil wants to say, yeah, but, you know, check out a little bit longer. And you say, no, I made a choice not to. God's looking. That's my boy. That's my boy. You made a good choice right there. You stopped after you admired and agreed. That woman's beautiful. You didn't go any further. Good job. You made the right choice. There's basis for reward in heaven. See, the point we got to get to is this. All these things I'm talking about may sound petty, and they may not mean too much to us now. But I got news for you. When we get to heaven, it's the only thing that'll matter. Everything that we're concerned about here on this earth, our kids, our grandkids, our house, our lifestyle, what we shall eat, drink, what clothes shall we wear, everything that's of concern to us, the moment we breathe our last, or the moment Jesus returns, whichever comes first, the moment that happens, all of that will no longer be a concern for us. We will have one thing and one thing only on our mind. We have to stand before him and give an account. What's that going to be like? So if we realize that now, then we invest more treasures in that now, rather than when it's too late and we're like, you got what you got. Time's up, put your pencil down, as they used to say in school. Miss Sally, If it was a time test, like we had a certain achievement test. Okay, time's up, stop, put your pencils down. You can't color in any more dots. No more circles. Okay, time's up. You can't, there's no 2-minute warning like there is in football. In football, you get a 2-minute warning. Both teams, there's 2 minutes left. So whoever's behind, you got 2 minutes to either make a defensive stop, get the ball back and go score, or if you're on offense, you better hurry it up. You do your hurry up offense. There is no 2-minute drill, so to speak. And if there is, then he's warning us now that, hey, here's your 2-minute drill. But I'm saying whenever he comes and returns, he's not going to say, okay, I'm returning on the clouds of glory. Okay, I'm going to give everybody 2 minutes. No. Time's up. Put your pencils down. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 12. I'm going to read a few scriptures here. Many of them are very familiar. This is part of the Beatitudes. At batting leadoff, the Beatitudes were the leadoff subject in the Sermon on the Mount. And he says in Matthew 5:12, "Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you." Okay? Well, people can insult you and they can say all kinds of bad things about you just because you've been a jerk. Just because you had a bad attitude. That's not what he's talking about here. He's saying when you are insulted and you're persecuted and they say all kinds of evil against you because of me. I don't mean to keep bringing up the subject, but it fits so well. Charlie Kirk. It's a prime example. I got news for you. It says next, let me read it and come back. It says, "Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Jesus is saying, Charlie, I know you're going to miss Erica. I know you're going to miss those kids. He says, but great is your reward. And in the same way they persecuted you, right there in public. I mean, they shouted, they raised their voice because they did it because of the stance you took for me. If he didn't take a stance for Jesus, he wouldn't have suffered that persecution. So that begs to ask, how many people don't stand to reap the same reward because they don't suffer insults and persecution because they don't take a righteous stance for him? So if you're not being persecuted, if you're not being shunned at work, if you're not being disowned by friends or family members, if you're not in contempt, people don't want to hear what you have to say, that's a form of persecution. I've told you before, I suffer that. I'm not saying as a pat on the back, I suffer that. It's contempt when people consider what you have to say beneath your consideration. Well, you pastor a small congregation. Like Eliab said to David, where have you left those few sheep? The pastors who pastor churches of 200 and 300 may look at me like that. So therefore, if I'm having a Bible study in Hampton, I don't need to go to that. You know, what can he say? I pastor a much larger congregation. I got bigger things to do. He's beneath my consideration. So, I mean, it's like some people who know me and love me, those who are even kin to me. Like I said, the contempt comes in this fashion. This is the way the Lord showed it to me. And I heard him speak it clearly. He said, relax. He said, you're just being persecuted in the form of contempt. Because what it is this. They have no doubt that what you have to say will benefit someone. It's just not for me. See what I'm saying? And it's the same way with you. I mean, maybe your kids. You know, they could probably learn from somebody better than you. They're more willing to receive from somebody else than they are you. The weird words of wisdom you have to say, it may benefit somebody, but it's just not for me. I already know that. I don't need you to tell me. Emphasis on you. I may need to hear it, but I don't need you to tell me. I don't know, have you ever been told that? I don't need you to tell me that? Okay, that's what we're talking. I don't need you to tell me that. that either means I think I know it, or even if I don't know it, I don't want to hear you tell me. Okay? You're persecuted for that because of me, because of your righteous stance. And he says, great is your reward in heaven. I got news for you. Charlie Kirk has a great reward that he is experiencing right now. And it's because of the great extents and great lengths where he stood toe to toe with the transgender. He stood toe to toe with the ones who wanted to come up with all these liberal agendas. And he stood toe to toe with them. He was mocked, made fun of. Even after his death, he's still being mocked and made fun of. Well, I personally believe, even though his life on earth has ceased because of that mockery and that persecution, I believe he's still receiving reward in heaven. Because it's just given to, if you can give a Purple Heart posthumously, then surely you can receive rewards from your Heavenly Father posthumously. So I personally believe that myself. Those seeds that he planted, because he planted the seed, he gets reward for the harvest. Somebody else will reap the harvest. Somebody else will take over and, run Turning Point. His wife, CEO of course, but other people will be raised up, and they will see all these thousands and millions come to know Jesus. Well, the seed was planted in the one who started it. Remember, it said John the Baptist came in the spirit and power of Elijah. Now, didn't Elisha have a double measure of the anointing? A double portion? Well, why does it not say John the Baptist came in the spirit and power of Elisha? It said he came in the spirit and power of Elijah. Why? Because God always honors the one who planted the seed and initiated the ministry. Others may carry a greater anointing because of that, but he recognizes the one upon whom it initiated. I am a product, these two are a product of a ministry of a ministry that the head of that ministry is going to receive reward, because what we're doing here is because of how I've grown and been taught through the years. And I've been trained and then released. Now go, just like he trains his disciples and said, now go. Well, the one who trained you is going to receive a reward. If any of you benefit from anything we teach here, then I'm due for a reward for that which you do with the word that you now learned. And you share, and the people who benefit from the word that you share, that you heard in the pulpit. And that likewise, what you share, those who benefit, you're going to receive a reward. It's like a lattice work. It just keeps going and going. He'll always honor the father of the movement. So everything that comes from now till Jesus returns as a result of Turning Point, Charlie will receive a reward for it. Even though it's posthumous, he will receive a reward for it. Because he's the one who God used to plant the seed and get the movement started. Others the same way. That's why John the Baptist came in the spirit and power of Elijah, not Elisha. Because Elijah was the one that started it. So what you start at your workplace, what you start in your family, that's what it's all about. It's all about. She's got a Bible study. Those who now launch out from her Bible study and start having other Bible studies, she's going to receive a reward for it, because she was the one who, got everybody spreading out. That's what he does. In Luke 6:22 through 23, in a similar matter, in Luke's version of this, it says, blessed are you when men hate you and ostracize you and insult you and scorn your name as evil for the sake of the Son of Man. Be glad in that day and leap for joy. For behold, your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way their fathers used to treat the prophets. The prophets of old used to suffer the same condemnation, the same persecution that you go through. It's a different culture now, but it's still, call it what it is. It's still being persecuted for your faith. So anytime you have to suffer loss of a friend because you took a stand, maybe as these issues like what happened in the last week, and they ask you what you think about that. You tell them your righteous stance. They disagree with you. As a result, you don't get invited to their house for, dinner, or you don't get invited out to dinner anymore. Just chalk it up as, hey, and being persecuted for his name's sake. Don't sweat it. Don't get upset. Don't try to go, butter them up. You still love them, you still minister to them, but just realize that, hey, it's just persecution, and great is your reward. So going back to what we were saying, shouldn't we be more heavenly minded? In Colossians 3:2, it says, set your mind, your affection. When it says your mind, it's talking about your affections. As we were talking about Sunday, it was at the end of the message. But did y'all hear and understand what we were sharing at the end of the message on Sunday out of Job 33 verses 15 through 17? If you weren't here, read Job 33 verses 15 through 17. Okay? We were emphasizing that how from the beginning in Genesis chapter 1, it says, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. There was evening and there was morning the second day. There was evening and there was morning the third day. And it goes all through the first 6 days of creation. Okay? As after God the Father, the Trinity, had created, at the end of each day, they said there was evening and there was morning. Because of that, the Jews, their day begins at night, at 6 p.m. At 6 p.m., their day begins. Ours, we call it when we wake up in the morning. Ours on our calendar is 12 midnight. Theirs is at 6 p.m. That's the reason why Jesus had to hurry and be buried, because he died at 3. They only had 3 hours to get him in a tomb because the Sabbath was the next day, and you don't work on the Sabbath. So they honored that. The point is your day begins at night. So if you want to have a better day, start with a better night. Now, I'm not trying to give you a commercial for a sleeping pill like you see, because, that's what you hear on TV for one of those sleeping pills, or maybe one of those NyQuil commercials when you're sick, To have a better day, why don't you have a better night? Well, you can do it by setting your affections on the Lord as you begin to lay down and rest. And you may do it differently than somebody else does. For some people, it may be reading a book. You just unwinding by reading a book. It's a Christian book, that is. Or you're reading the Bible. Some people have their devotional times at night because you're not a morning person. Well, whatever you do, even if you're just getting into bed. And for me, like I shared, I usually put on worship music or a teaching message and go to sleep and just let that play. Why? Because your mind needs to rest, your body needs to rest, but your spirit doesn't need rest. It never rests. What is it? Song of Solomon 5:2? Though I am asleep, my heart is awake. So your spirit man is awake 24/7. It never sleeps. Your spirit never sleeps. So while you're sleeping, Job 33:15 says, if you set your affection on him, then he will download things in your spirit during the night. It could be the answer to a problem that you're facing. All of a sudden you wake up the next morning and you're thinking of the idea. You don't realize it, but it was downloaded in your spirit through the night. I have gotten sermon outlines. I have gotten parts of sermons in the middle of the night. I have gotten all kinds of stuff. I wake up in the middle of the night frequently, as do all of you. Okay, I'm not so young that I don't have to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I have to do that probably once a night. Okay, because I foolishly drink too many fluids before I close my eyes. Okay, all right. So I do have to get up 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. All right, but sometimes I wake up, without having to go to the restroom, and the Holy Spirit just wakes me up. and something will be in my spirit. And I got to jot it down, take notes of it. And I've learned the hard way. If I don't take notes on it, when I wake up the next morning, I don't remember what it was. Now, you may have that same thing too. Okay? So, it says he will download things, he will seal our instruction, is the way it's phrased. He says because he gives it to us during the day, then we'll become prideful because we'll think it's our idea. But if he does it when our mind's at rest and our body's hard and fast asleep, then he can only get credit for it because it was downloaded in our spirit during the night. Just like in the old days, whenever you would do a computer update, you would do it before you went to bed at night because of the slow speeds of your internet, and it would take all night for that computer or that phone to update or download an update because of your dial-up internet. Now you got faster speeds, okay? But still, it's the same concept. So set your mind on things above, because it's high time that we start shifting our focus to the reward system of heaven. We, again, as we noted last week, we do it for the relationship. But in the back of my mind, the reward is there, just like it was with David, as we noted last week. David fought Goliath to take away the reproach of Israel. He would have done it if there was no reward. But in the back of his mind, he knew that threefold reward that was coming to him for having slain Goliath. Okay? He would be blessed richly. He would get the king's daughter. And Jesse would then henceforth be exempt from taxes. And that was just icing on the cake. Our rewards are icing on the cake. We do it for our love for Jesus. It may not seem important now, but it'll be all we think about when we get there. While you're there in Matthew 5, you can flip over to Matthew 6, 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And you can tell what is important to somebody by the only thing they ever talk about. If you talk to somebody and they never talk about the Lord, then evidently he's not number one in their life. If you're talking to somebody, and I've been guilty of it through the years, and I had to be disciplined by the Lord about it as well. Even though you're a preacher, but if all you ever talk about is sports, that's the only thing you ever talk about, sports. And it could be sports on TV, or it could be sports that you participate in with a fishing rod or a rifle. But if all you ever talk about is sports, or all you ever talk about is cooking or baking or recipes, and you never talk about the Lord, wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. And out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth's going to speak. So if you've got word of the Lord because you've been in the presence of the Lord, as it said in Acts 4:20, you can't help but tell of the things you've seen and heard. What God downloaded during the night, you can't help but tell somebody. You've got to share it. Now, some things you're supposed to keep to yourself, because the Lord will say, hey, that's between you and me. There's words from the Lord I haven't released to anybody because it has to do with my future. And if I open up my mouth and say it, then the devil hears it. He can't read my thoughts. But if I open my mouth and say it, then I'm revealing what God has shown me, and that gives him an opportunity to thwart it. So I need to keep that between me and the Lord from that which he's downloaded. Likewise with you. It says in Colossians 3, 23 through 24, whatever you do, whether it's preparing food, serving food, whatever it is, do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. For he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong, which he has done, and that without partiality. Regardless of race, creed, color, denomination, doesn't matter. 2 John 1:8, that we may receive a full reward. God's desire is for us to receive the maximum reward we possibly can for you doing what you were called to do. You receive the maximum reward. He wants us to receive everything that's listed on Jesus' receipt. Jesus paid for it. We're supposed to be enjoying it and operating in it. Hebrews 10:35, in the meantime, cast not away your confidence. And that word confidence is the same word for boldness. Parrhesia in the Greek. Don't lose your boldness, which has great recompense of reward. And that phrase, recompense of reward, is mistapedosia, which is the word for reward. So if you don't lose your boldness, you have great recompense of reward. So it's not just a matter of letting my light shine. It's don't lose your boldness. Don't back down from being bold witnesses for Jesus. Because the bolder you are, the greater the reward. So speak up, and don't hesitate to speak up. Surely he says, if you deny me before men, I'll deny you from my Father. It's not that you're not denying him. It's not that you're denying him. We're not saying that. But yet you're not speaking up for him either. We need to constantly be declaring the goodness of the Lord. Now, now's the time for us to shift gears. Okay? And if we don't do anything but introduce this tonight, this part, because this is the nitty-gritty that we need to get into. Okay? As far as this reward. Everything we've covered the last 2 weeks and the first half of tonight is introduction. It's a long introduction. Now we get into the nitty-gritty. There are a number of parables that Jesus taught that have to do with this. And when you read them, you may not have realized that it is talking about this same subject. There are up to 10 parables that we could refer to. But there are 6 parables in particular that we're going to refer to. Okay? Now, before I talk about what these 6 have to do with, I need to explain something. So if you will, I want you to see it for yourself. Hebrews 13. I want you to turn there. Hebrews 13. There is a concept in the Old Testament. There were things that happened outside the gate of the camp, outside the gates of the city, if you will. There were things that took place inside the city, but there were things that took place outside the city, outside the gates. When it says outside the gates, it means the outside the gates of the city limits. And then there's things that took place outside the camp. Okay? Things that took place way out yonder. Okay, let me give you an example. Say, for instance, you have a wooden rocking chair in your house that you had in your house whenever your kids were little. And you used it to rock your babies or grandbabies to sleep. Now they're all grown. Okay? Now they're too big to rock to sleep. So you look at that rocking chair and you say, okay, I don't need it in the house. It's taking up space. So I'm going to go take it outside the house and put it on the porch or on the back deck. You moved it. It's still on your premises, is it not? But you moved it from inside the house to outside the house. But it's not inside the house where everything's lit up. In another hour, it'll be good dark. And that rocking chair is sitting out in the pitch black dark. If it was still inside your house, it would still be under lights. There's a little bit of light on it coming from the inside of the house, but it's going to be out there in a relative outer darkness. But say, for instance, you're like, hey, I'm done with it. I don't want it anymore. It's worn out. Take it to the dump. Taking it outside the house and putting it on the porch is outside the gates. Taking it all the way to the dump is taking it outside the camp. There were things that they did outside the camp. When they did the slaughter of the animals for the sacrifices, all they wanted really was the blood, correct? So what did they do with the rest of the hide? Now the meat obviously would be often sold or whatever. But what did they do with just like when you skin a deer? I don't even want to know, you dear Lord. I don't even want to know. Don't tell me. I mean, especially what I mean. I don't want to know what y'all do with those legs and skin and eyes and I don't even know what y'all do with it. I don't want to know. Okay? I don't even want to know what the deer processor does with it. But in those days when they would slaughter the animals, and this was a lot of animals, they would take all that guts and remains and take it outside the camp where you couldn't smell it. And outside, particularly in Jerusalem, south of Jerusalem, was a valley of Hinnom. And that valley dates all the way back to the Old Testament. And it's where they would burn carcasses. They would burn even bodies that couldn't afford a funeral. You know, poor people, they couldn't afford a funeral. They didn't have a tomb. They didn't have no land to bury them on. You know, so hey, just, you know, we'll say the funeral for them, have the funeral for them, the eulogy, and then go put them in there and let the body be burned, just like we cremate today. Okay? Carcasses, all that kind of stuff would be burned outside the camp. If someone was to be disciplined, they would be disciplined outside the gates. Stephen was stoned outside the gates. Now, he was stoned for his faith, obviously. But if someone was accused of a really heinous crime, and to the religious, not honoring the Sabbath, and, you know, things like that, they considered a heinous crime. Those really heinous crimes that the Jews would stone for, they would stone outside the camp. Leprosy was disgusting. Lepers had to go outside the camp. So there were some things that were done outside the gates of the city, like some discipline problems, discipline issues, and then come on back in. But there are things that were done outside the camp. And we see that in Leviticus 16. You stay where you're at. I'm just going to read this. It said, "For the bull of the sin offering and the goat of the sin offering, whose blood was brought in to make atonement in the holy place, shall be taken outside the camp, and they shall burn their hides, their flesh, and their refuse in the fire. Then the one who burns them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body with water. Then afterwards he shall come into the camp." It's the signification of, we want you removed from our presence. That has to be removed from our presence. Well, that concept of removal from presence is the same reason why in Exodus 33, verse 7, it says Moses pitched the tent of the temporary tabernacle outside the camp because of the guilt and shame of the children of Israel for having worshipped a golden calf. And it says that Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, a good distance from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. So if you wanted to go to the tent of the meeting, you got to go outside the camp. Okay? Later it would be brought inside the gates when the tabernacle was constructed. But that temporary one, because I got to go pray on y'all's behalf for all y'all's sin and idol worship and everything. Okay? Well, in Hebrews 13, in verses 11 through 14, it says, "For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy place by the high priest as an offering for sin, they are burned outside the camp. Therefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate." Now, you got to understand, by the time it got to be Jesus, the time when Jesus walked on the earth, then everything outside the gate was pretty much out there, okay? But in the Old Testament, they differentiated between outside the gate and outside the camp. The smaller issues were handled outside the gate. The disgusting stuff was relegated outside the camp. That which was going to be destroyed. That which was not to be destroyed was just handled outside the gate. But that which was to be destroyed permanently is handled outside the camp. And of course, leprosy was considered a permanent condition till Jesus came along, because no one ever got healed from it. So y'all can go on out there and die. Y'all can go on out there outside the camp. Okay, So it says here, so let us go to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach, which is disgrace. Another translation says, so we must arise and join him outside the religious walls and bear his disgrace. So we need, this is talking about in the New Testament, we must identify with him by doing what we just talked about. Be willing to go outside the camp and suffer persecution. Go outside the camp and suffer disgrace. Go outside the camp and be ridiculed and insulted for his name's sake. We must be willing to do that. However, from this is what I'm drawing for the sake of our rewards in heaven. There's a difference between outside the gate and outside the camp. And there are 6 parables that Jesus teaches. The first 3 that we're going to cover, we won't get to them tonight, but the first 3 we're going to cover, Jesus says directly, and he uses the phrase either being cut into pieces, which to me is permanent destruction, or be cast into a furnace of fire. 3 parables that we've just read through and didn't think nothing of them. Oh, okay, move on, next parable. When we read them, you could be like, oh my goodness, this is what he's talking about. There are people who think they're going to be fine, who think they're going to heaven. They think they got a mansion in glory. And when they stand before Jesus, he's going to say, sorry, I never knew you. And he's going to tell them, in paraphrasing, you're going outside the camp. For those who are believers, who they have the foundation, they made it to heaven, but they either have no basis for reward or they have very little, relatively speaking, basis for reward. They don't have much to show for it. He says in 3 other parables, he says you're going to be relegated outside the gates. But he uses a phrase for both of them. In the first 3, he uses furnace of fire being cut into pieces. In the other 3, he does not say anything about a furnace of fire or cut into pieces. But in all 6 of them, he says, you must be cast into an outer darkness. And in that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So for the first 3, who have a false sense of eternal security, and he says, sorry, I never knew you. The outer darkness is a gross darkness outside the camp where it is pitch black dark. For those who are believers, who have the foundation, but little or no basis for reward, who think they're up there with Billy Graham and Charlie Kirk, he's going to say, not so fast, my friend. You're going to be cast into a relative outer darkness at the back of the line, so to speak. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Your name card's on the table way back there. And it's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth to you, but it's not going to be as bad as their weeping and gnashing of teeth. But you're still going to have weeping and gnashing of teeth. Because it is a sign of remorse. Remorse is not repentance. Remorse is you regret your actions, you dread your consequences. So I thought I had more rewards in heaven, and I realized I don't, because what I was doing was works, and it was burned up like wood, hay, and stubble, because I did it to be seen, as we talked about last week. But those who have a basis for reward, enter into the joy of your master. Come. Enter into the gates. So let me ask you, is it possible to have a foundation here on earth, foundation of Jesus, and yet not be serving him and living in the kingdom? Is that possible? Yes. Is the reward the same for those who got saved and do nothing for him, and those who got saved and are doing things for him? Is the reward the same? No. Okay? For the thief on the cross, relative outer darkness. You made it in at the nick of time, hour away before you breathed in your last. You had no opportunity to do anything for me. You are Mr. Irrelevant, which is what they called an NFL draft, the last person drafted. Okay? They call him Mr. Irrelevant. You are Mr. Irrelevant. You're the last one at the last table, at the last seat in the banquet. And you are in an outer darkness. And he's going to be weeping and gnashing, and still is weeping and gnashing his teeth, because he's sitting there thinking, what if I would have received him a lot sooner and did something for him? Okay? And again, we've talked before, as we wrap it up for tonight, this subject of weeping and gnashing of teeth came from a concept of, use this table as the walls of the city. And there would be a section of every city that on the outside of that wall, in one area, they would dump all the trash. All the garbage would be raised up and dropped over there. Obviously, lions, tigers, bears, every kind of wolves, every kind of animals will come there during the night to eat the scraps. Well, if they had a judicial matter and they could not decide guilt or innocence, they would say, okay, well, we just go turn it over to the sovereignty of the Lord, or we just going to let nature decide, or whatever they were thinking. And they would take that person on trial, and they would tie a rope around him and drop him over to the other side of that wall and leave him there overnight. If the next morning they come and they pull the rope up and all they have is a noose, then they automatically assume he was guilty and God's judgment was upon him. But if they pull him back up and he's still alive, they figured he must have been innocent. Set him loose, turn and let him free. You go ahead. Case dismissed. The only problem with that is because he had such a horrible night.
He's probably crazy.
He was half insane. He was. He was half insane. He had been crying all night. And his teeth, his dental work was ground down from where he had gnashed his teeth. And that's where that phrase comes from. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. It was that concept back in that day. It goes back thousands of years. So it says in that same intrepidation, he said there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth when we stand before the Lord. And some realize you're being relegated to a relative outer darkness. You still made it to heaven because you had the foundation. But you had little or no basis for reward, and you will regret. You will say, I wish to God I'd have served him when I had the chance and done more for him. Because what I did for him was for show. What I did for him was to be seen, and all that got burned up. And those who sadly have a false sense of eternal security, he's going to say, be cast into the gross outer darkness and outside the camp. And there is the furnace of fire. There you will be cut into pieces. 3 parables, he says that. 3 parables, he doesn't. But in all 6, he said there is an outer darkness you're going to. And when we study these parables, we'll get at least 2 of them, if not 3 of them done next week. And when we study these parables, you're going to be like, huh, that's what these parables meant. Because of the way they end. But this darkness, I'm talking about like the relative darkness outside the gates. You have those huge city walls. You out there, and it's dark, but it's still sunlight because it's coming from the city. I mean, Jesus talked about a city set on a hill. You can see the light so bright, it'll shine for miles. But it's like going outside tonight. You got a little bit of light, but it's not like sunlight like you have in the city. But outside the camp, you can't see your hand in front of your face. And that's what he's talking about. There's 2 extremes, outside the gate, outside the camp. And you will see it come up in these parables. Yep. And it's high time, because there's some people that's going to be relegated to one or the other. I want to be inside the gate. Inside the gate is when he says, enter into the joy of your master. That is the kingdom. That's your place of great reward. Great, because he says too many times, great is your reward in heaven, least is your reward. So he says it too many times for us to ignore. You could either have great reward or little reward.